You've heard the conventional view.
Now prepare yourself to hear the other side.
High school teachers Mike Margison and Justin Spears bring you the alternative view you didn't get in the classroom. Now here they are, Margison and Spears.
That's right. Back on a Wednesday evening, as always. Very, very happy to be with you this evening. Thanks for tuning in to The Other Side. I am one half of The Other Side, Justin Spears, joined as always by Mr. Mike Margison. As always, you can reach us in a number of different platforms, and we encourage you to find the platform that works best for you to consume the show. Obviously, if you're listening to us live this evening on our YouTube page, we appreciate that. Hey, while you're over there, go ahead and do us a favor and give us a subscribe. We're really trying to boost our subscription numbers up over there. So if you wouldn't mind doing that, that would help us out tremendously, and pass along the word on that as well. You can, if you're at the office or at home, view old episodes on YouTube, or always you can check us out when we're broadcasting live there. You can catch us on the Spreaker app. That is a podcast app that you can get on iPhone or Android through the Google Play Store. Just search The Other Side with Margison and Spears, and you can favorite the show, and you will get updates when we upload these live episodes recorded on there. You can catch us on 92.1, 1550 AM, WCVL out of Crawfordsville on Saturday mornings at 8. A huge thank you to the folks out there for keeping our show going on Saturday mornings there, or WCVLAM.com. Our social media platforms, we would love and highly encourage you to participate and engage with us through our social media. You can get us on Facebook at TOS Podcast is the page for the show. I'm on personal, Justin Spears 4, so facebook.com / Justin Spears 4. You can catch us on Twitter at TOS_podcast. Mike is at Mr. Margison on Twitter, and I am at Justin Spears 4 on Twitter. So we are also excited to say that we are in the process of getting this show available on iTunes and Google Play. So yet even more opportunity to be able to listen to the show on a mobile device. We are active as of now. Just got word prior to coming on air that we are a go on iTunes, and we'll be getting the information out to you on that. And we are pending approval on Google Play. So there are literally 5 or 6 different ways that you can catch this show. And no matter which way you're listening to us, just really, really encourage any feedback that you can give to us. Any comments that you have, hey, really like the show. Hey, really think you guys should look at doing this. We would highly, highly appreciate that. We're always looking for ways in which we can continue to fine tune what we're doing here and bring you guys a good, engaging show. So having said that, before we jump into our show for this evening, as I mentioned, we are very grateful for the folks out at 1550 92.1 in Crawfordsville and our sponsor out there, Common Sense Products. Mike, did you know that there are over 230 million cars and trucks on USA roads today?
Actually, I did not.
Yeah. Did you know that most cars believe that most owners believe that they should go about every 3,000 miles in between oil changes, and that oil doesn't wear out, it becomes contaminated. Most popular brand oil filters are effective down to 30 microns at best. Many major oil companies are selling recycled motor oil today that's used. Oil doesn't wear out. Super filter your oil with the 1 micron filtering system. The poly filter is easy to use and can be used for many years. Your kit includes 2 washable filters and what to watch for in used oil, where to find oil, and how to market filtered oil to others if you wish. Now, you can get this product by sending $20 cash, check, or money order to Common Sense Products, P.O. Box 172, New Richmond, Indiana, 47967. Tax and shipping are paid. And again, that's Common Sense Products, P.O. Box 172, New Richmond, Indiana, 47967. $20 cash, check, or money order will get you the 1 poly filter and get more out of your oil. So again, thank you to Common Sense Products for being a sponsor of the show. We really appreciate that. And having gotten all that out of the way, Mike, what in fact is up this evening?
Nothing much. Happy Pi Day.
Yes, happy Pi Day, happy National Walkout Day as well. Yeah, we jokingly sent some banter back and forth about that today. That's another topic for another show. Although we will be talking about walking, I guess, in some form here with our episode today. We're going to be tackling immigration this evening. And I know this might be an eye roller at first because you think that you've probably heard everything there is to hear about immigration. And it's something that honestly has kind of fizzled down, I guess, a little bit. Would you say that's probably true, Mike?
Certainly since the campaign, and then it kind of revved back up when Trump made some irreverent comments about a month ago. But yeah, lately we haven't heard a whole lot about it. The last I really heard is that he was going down to San Diego to check out prototypes for the wall.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. Well, listen, the fact here with immigration, gang, is that, you can listen to different outlets, whether you choose to listen to more left leaning, right leaning, whatever media outlets describe immigration. And you'll hear people talk about it from a good perspective and a bad perspective from the economy. So let's just jump right into this, Mike. What is the average curious American supposed to make of this? Right, wrong, indifferent? What are we supposed to make about this?
Well, yeah, you're right. You can listen to one media outlet and hear that immigration is good for the economy, and then 10 minutes later, listen to a different media outlet, and they will say immigration is bad for the economy. And so that's got to be confusing to the average American. But I think the way that we're talking about immigration is faulty here. I don't think that you can talk about immigration as a whole or talk about it in the aggregate or in the abstract. It's not, immigration isn't a thing, right? I mean, people are things and people can immigrate, but immigration as this kind of entity is not something that we should discuss. And we certainly shouldn't be asking Congress to make policy about, quote, immigration, because what we should be dealing with, or what we should be looking at, are different immigrants. And given the fact that everybody is different and that we have, literally tens of millions of immigrants in this country, from all different countries around the world, to try and talk about the issue as it's a one size fits all thing just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So I think the way that we address it has to be changed. We shouldn't just be saying immigration this or immigration that. And then, yeah, especially when it comes to economics, it's impossible to say whether it is good or bad for the economy. I think that's just misleading. I think what you can do is you can usually start with your position or what you want to hear, and then go find statistics to back it up. And that's mostly what you hear from partisan media outlets. But the truth is, it really just depends. It depends upon which country you are and where you are time-wise within that country. Because, again, people behave differently. For instance, let me tell you what I'm talking about. Like the nation of Japan, they haven't been reproducing at the replacement level for decades now. And this is common in a lot of East Asian nations. They have a demographic trend where there are a number of people who are set to retire, getting towards that age in the 50s and 60s, where they're no longer going to be in the workforce. And those jobs that are currently held, because they have lower populations, because fertility rates have dropped, there aren't enough actual physical people to fill those jobs in Japan. So they're going to be looking for some external foreign source of labor at some point. And that's not just Japan, that's an example, but we see the same thing in Singapore. You see the same thing in, like certain Chinese cities like Beijing. And not only that, but also in the United States, right? If you look at it 100 years ago in the United States, we were producing way above replacement level. I mean, on average, two people would produce five, there would be families of five, so 3+ kids. And now I don't know if we are below replacement level or not, but we're close. And it's just when economies change, people change their behaviors, and we're not having as many kids. And so we're going to have a situation in the near future where you're going to have, X number of people retiring and leaving jobs, and a smaller number of people coming up in order to fill those jobs. And yeah, at some point, we are going to need a foreign source of labor in order to be able to fill that if we don't have enough laborers here at home. So it depends upon time. It depends upon where you are. And then you could look at like an African nation, a sub-Saharan African nation that is not very industrialized, where they simply don't have the number of jobs to sustain the number of people that they have. So there are no jobs to actually absorb, the human labor, the human capital. And then you run into situations where there might be a civil war next door. And we've seen this, countless times, unfortunately, in sub-Saharan Africa. But you might have migrants, refugees, forcibly pushed into this particular nation, and that just exacerbates the problem. I mean, you have even more people and literally no jobs at all to absorb them. So there might be, one place in the world where immigration is necessary, one place in the world where immigration is counterproductive. There might be the one country where in one decade you need immigration, and then in another decade you're at full employment and you don't. So talking about it in broad strokes, it doesn't make any sense. So I think for the first thing we need to do is change the way that we speak about it.
All right. So the need for immigrants, right, for the labor workforce is something that I find interesting. So I guess my next logical question is there a hierarchy of the immigrant that you want to look for as a country, allowing people into your nation? So I kind of have a hypothetical in my mind here, if you can follow me for a minute. So you've got person A, who maybe is from Japan, has a PhD in physics, and a well-respected doctor, maybe somebody who's started a business, employed people, and that person wants to immigrate and become a citizen of our country. And then you have person B, who may be a migrant worker from a Latin American country, has been in poverty, generational poverty his whole life, and really just fallen on hard times, maybe even been through the legal system in that country, and is just looking for a fresh start, looking to escape tyranny, looking to get away from a bad situation, but really just doesn't have much skill that they can bring to the table. Should we be looking at that, and what weight does that have in terms of how we consider immigration policy?
Well, their background should have no weight. It's just a matter of it's where do we need them? Is there a demand? Look, if there are no demand for doctors, then we don't need the doctor. It doesn't matter how accomplished they are. If there is a demand for service workers or maybe construction workers, then we could use either of them, really, if the doctor is willing to do construction work or service work. Certainly the Guatemalan, given the credentials that you spoke of, wouldn't be able to do medical work, but it depends upon where the demands are in a society. And so, like, in our country right now, we're at a place where we are importing certain jobs. I mean, we seem to be importing engineers. We are importing, in fact, a lot of service workers, especially down in the Southeast, in, like hotel staffs and stuff like that. A lot of them are Caribbean. But there appears to be a need for that. So really, it depends upon what the needs of a particular nation, of a particular economy are.
Okay. As we think a little bit then about what they contribute then once they come here, right? Immigrants are productive, they supply labor, they're contributing tax dollars, or are they leeching off of welfare?
Yeah, you hear both. So which is correct? That's a difficult question. One of the things that's frustrating is the way people use stats. So I was looking at one. Actually, there was one particular study where the Center for Immigration Studies, which tends to be, I don't want to say nativist, but maybe a little bit more anti-immigrant. They were citing this study, and they were saying that yes, in fact, immigrants are more likely to use welfare than native-born citizens. And then the outlet Vox, VOX, not F, Vox, who is a left-leaning outlet, they used the exact same study, and they said no, native populations are more likely to use welfare than immigrant populations. And I thought that was fascinating, how two opposing outlets could use the exact same study and come to opposite conclusions. But really, it's the way that you want to read the study. The truth of the matter is, first generation illegal immigrants usually don't qualify for federal welfare because there are rules against that. But a lot of the times, if they come here and have a child, that child is automatically a United States citizen who does qualify for federal benefits. So if you use individuals as your metric, then you can say, yes, natives are more likely as an individual to use welfare. But if you use households as your metric, and then you have two people in there who are not using welfare because the laws prevent it, but then one child who is eligible for federal benefits under our welfare system, then yes, immigrant households are more likely to use welfare. So it all depends upon what, again, like I said, you could have a conclusion in mind and then use the statistics to meet your conclusion, which is actually really frustrating because then it just becomes a partisan issue.
Right. So, based on what I'm hearing you say, then, it seems to be relatively inconclusive as to the net benefit or drag that immigration has on a society. So, at the end of the day, where do you stand on this issue?
Surprisingly, actually, and I say that because a lot of people know that I voted for Trump and I support Trump on most things. But I'm actually pro-immigration. I am as in favor of immigrants coming over here as laborers, as I am in favor of foreign products coming over here. I own a Hyundai and I own a foreign-made cell phone. So I think the free flow of products, including steel and aluminum, that's another topic for another day. But I think the free flow of products across borders is important and it's good for consumers. In the same way, I feel that the free flow of labor as an economic product is important and it's good for not only consumers, but it's good for businesses. It's a win-win. One of the problems that we have in our country, though, is we have a system set up that sends perverse economic signals for people to come here, whether or not the economy is actually in demand of their services. So if you can come here and, like if you're a household who can come in here, if you come here and bear a child on U.S. soil and that child becomes a United States citizen, and then all of a sudden your household is eligible for federal benefits, welfare benefits, then you're migrating here not based upon demand for labor or demand for whatever your skills are. There is some other economic incentive in play. So it skews it a little bit. So you can't have these types of rules in place. You can't have a welfare system in place and open borders. But if we didn't have a welfare system at all in this country and we just let the market choose it, I would be completely for open immigration. I would say, because it would just be a free flow, and it's like water finding its most natural level. The people would gravitate. If there were no jobs here, then they would leave, because it would that or starve to death. So, the same way that we don't see Russian cars in the United States, at least I don't think, I've never seen a Russian-made car or an Indian-made car in the United States. You wouldn't see laborers who didn't fit the needs of American businesses or American citizens. So I'm not surprisingly more of a market guy.
Yeah, no, that completely makes sense. I actually agree with you on a lot of what you said there, and I think that makes total sense as far as how to handle the immigration issue. I think where we get this muddied up, obviously, is where our beloved government has entered in to the mix here.
Actually, and that's perfect because I was talking about that situation where you have, quote unquote anchor babies. But I wanted to ask you, now that we're talking about government, what power, and this is something we always have to go back to, what power does the government actually have here? What exactly is the federal government given the power to do with respect to immigration?
Well, I think the first thing that we got to obviously take a look at is the Constitution, the guiding document that sets the rules for what the government can do and cannot do. And as we've talked about in several other episodes when looking at this, we go back to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and we're going to consult Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 here, which states in part, that Congress shall have the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization. And that's it. Now, you might hear that and go, well, how am I supposed to make out all this convoluted rules and laws and everything related to immigration off of a statement that says Congress shall have the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization? What does that even really truly mean? Well, we'll break that down here in just a second, but suffice it to say that, really what Congress has the authority to do is set the rules for what it means to become a citizen of this country. So, when you go through and you look at, the different regulations and rules that a person must go through upon entering into the country, those are all valid powers that are being executed by the national government, as is laid out in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4, for setting the rules of becoming a citizen of this country. What it does not do, and what is completely absent from the Constitution, is anything granted to the national government in terms of setting immigration policy. In other words, who can come into this country and who cannot come into this country. And so we'll talk a little bit about that here in just a moment. But the last thing that I would say about that is, okay, well, since it isn't laid out exclusively or expressly in the Constitution that the national government has the authority to set rules on who can and cannot come into this country, the question that we should have to ask is, well, then who does? And my go-to is always the 10th Amendment. Any rights that aren't granted basically to the national government are reserved to the states. So this would essentially become a state's right in terms of who they would or would not allow into their state, right, or their country, as I tend to think of it as. And so I think that is when we look at getting back to the original intent here of what the Constitution has to say about this. I think that's really what we have to look at is it's very, very clear. Now, I know there are some who have made an effort to tie being able to set the rules for naturalization to immigration, but to me, that's a stretch. I just don't see that.
Okay, so given that, what solutions are there for states to take back some power in the immigration issue? Like, what is this going to look? How can we make this look like the way it was intended under the manner that the founders actually structured our government?
Well, that's a great question, and some people think that this is so far removed from anything where it's one of those things that the national government, once it takes power, it's very difficult to get it back. That to undo court rulings and restore power to the states would be almost virtually impossible thing to do. Before I talk specifically about some of what I believe are potential solutions for this, I did want to just for the listener make clear the difference between naturalization and immigration. And I want to read in part from an article that I printed out here from the Mises Institute by Ryan McMacken, who I believe has been a guest with our Cerberus Radio network host Suzanne Sherman on her show, The Wasatch Report, which, by the way, highly encourage you guys to be checking out the great programming over on the Cerberus Radio network as well. Suzanne does a great job. She's on K-Talk Radio. Jeff and Dan have their shows going on as well. And so I highly encourage you to check those out. But Ryan McMacken with the Mises Institute was on with Suzanne, and he wrote a piece entitled "Don't Confuse Immigration with Naturalization." And he says in part, in the start here, as the immigration debate goes on, many commentators continue to sloppily ignore the difference between the concept of naturalization and the phenomenon of immigration. While the two are certainly related, they are also certainly not the same thing. Recognizing this distinction can help us to see the very real difference between naturalization, which is a matter of political privilege, and immigration, which simply results from the exercise of private property rights. Immigration results naturally from allowing persons to exercise their property rights. Naturalization, on the other hand, is a political act. So when you think about, what the difference here is between these two, I take that to mean property rights are natural rights. Natural rights are things that we are ordained by God with, that we are not granted by the ordaining of any government on this earth. And so, I guess, in other words, how I would read that is you have a God given right to be able to move freely about this earth without interference from a government. Now, they can set rules once you're there for what it would mean to become a citizen. That is indeed what he says being a political act. And if you don't meet those qualifications and standards, then you could face deportation or whatever the penalties would be under those laws. But the ability to freely move, goes back to what you were talking about in the end of your answer there on being pro immigration and allowing the free flow of goods and services, and then in this case, people from country to country. We see that acknowledged within our country, right? Within the states. I can freely travel over to Illinois or down to Kentucky or Ohio without having to go through any checkpoint or border check or anything like that. So, definitely would want to make sure that the listener understands the distinction between that. And if you're interested, you can find different resources on that. Like I said, Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center has a great piece on this as well that you can check out called Immigration versus Naturalization. You can read a little bit more there. Now, to wrap up here with the solutions, right? What solutions are there for the states to take back power? Really, I think what we're going to have are just kind of the showdowns that we saw between Jan Brewer and Barack Obama on the tarmac out in Arizona. We just need governors that are going to stand up, right? Let's take a look at what's going on now with Jeff Sessions and the sanctuary cities. We're going to need people to stand up and say, look, pal, we in the state of California, we want A, B, and C to occur with immigrants, and you really don't have much of an authority here with this. And if the citizens of the state of California want that, more power to them. That doesn't affect me over here in the state of Indiana. If my governor says we don't want people coming into the state from these particular areas, then I believe it's the right of the governor to be able to do that. Right. This was the big showdown with the Syrian refugees and whatnot when Obama said you're going to have to take them in. He basically issued the ultimatum to the governors that you got to take these refugees in.
Yeah, like an extra 500,000 or so. I forget what the number was, but
right. Yeah. That to me, that's just total abuse of power by the national government. They have no authority on that whatsoever. And listen, honestly, I'll just be blunt with you on this. I don't care what you have to say about what 9 judges in black robes have to say about this. I get that all the time. Well, the Supreme Court has clearly ruled. Well, yeah, the Supreme Court's also said it's okay to yank a baby out of a woman's uterus and murder it. The Supreme Court has also said that it's okay to do a lot of stupid things. Our Congress has obviously passed a lot of unconstitutional laws. At one point, they thought it would be okay to allow the president to intern Japanese citizens during World War II. At one point, they thought separate but equal was okay. So that's a very, very shaky ground to stand on to say, well, the Supreme Court says. I just don't buy that for one moment. So I really think, the only solution, right, viable solution here is just for the states to stand up and for the governors to have a backbone and say, listen, go pound sand. I don't. You're not going to tell us what to do here on this issue. This is a states' right issue. Open up your pocketbook constitution and read. You can set rules on naturalization, but you do not have any authority to practice and tell me what immigration policy should look like in my state.
You mentioned that showdown in Arizona, and I agree with you 100%. This has got to be a states' rights issue, and Arizona was tired of immigrants pouring over the border, and they were, by all accounts, clogging up facilities, making certain institutions more difficult to run, schools and what have you. And yeah, Barack Obama and his administration told ICE agents just to basically ignore calls from Arizona officials. They're not going to come, the government's not going to come and apprehend them. And I think that's a pretty flagrant abuse of federal power, don't you?
Oh, yeah, and absolutely. And the one thing that never gets talked about here with this is that it's the citizens of Arizona that are left to deal with this mess. They're the ones that on a daily basis have to deal with the flood of people into their state, that, whatever the result is, good, bad, or indifferent, they're the ones that have to deal with it. Why should I, in the state of Indiana, or somebody in the state of Massachusetts or Minnesota or wherever else in this country, that doesn't affect me when people immigrate into another state? That's something that they have to deal with, having the resources, the infrastructure. You just see this happening, and you feel for those people, because I'm sure Jan Brewer and other officials. I know Joe Apiro is a really outspoken sheriff down there, and I'm sure those poor ICE agents and Border Patrol agents probably felt like, we don't know what to do. Do we follow the law? Do we not follow the law? Do we detain people, not detain people? And I mean, it just was a real mess. And I think it was a blatant reaching of federal government into what should obviously be a states' rights issue here.
Great point. I think we're going to have to sign off here with our listeners on 92.1 FM, 1550 AM, WCVL. We want to thank you very much for listening, or if you're listening on WCVLAM.com this morning. We will be coming back with you next week, next Saturday morning. And do we have a topic yet next Saturday, Justin?
I know we've talked about a couple of things, but I think we need to get together and finalize that. So we'll. I
don't think we have a topic.
I know, yeah, it's been a busy week this week. So we'll get together and finalize that, and we'll put a little message out on it through social media, and our radio audience can check us out on one of our social media accounts to find out what we'll be talking about.
So those of you on the radio, we want to thank you for listening. Those of you listening live on YouTube, stay with us. We'll be right back. We will see you on the other side. All right, Justin, let's continue this conversation, because I think it's important. You mentioned Syrian refugees coming over, and I wanted to bring up something along those lines. We allow an unlimited number of refugees into our country. If somebody comes from an oppressive regime, we have no quotas that keep them out. We also have this ridiculous policy called a visa lottery system, which I'm guessing most people didn't know a whole lot about until that, was he an Uzbek who started mowing people down on Halloween?
Yeah.
You remember what I'm talking about?
Yes.
I believe he was Uzbeki. But this visa lottery system, this is just an indiscriminate, well, I guess lottery. I mean, that's what it is. It's just an indiscriminate, it's like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory finding a golden ticket and coming here. And that there is no indication that the market is in demand for your services. There's no indication that your skills match the skills needed in the labor force. It just makes absolutely no sense. And so when I talked in the beginning about the fact that, people paint immigration in these broad strokes, heck, they throw the PhD Japanese that you described, plus the Syrian refugees, plus the Uzbekis from the visa lottery system, they just throw them all in the same pot and say, okay, let's make a law about these people. I mean, it's just asinine.
No, it really is. And I think the thing to me that, you really can't approach this in this manner anymore. And it's really sad, because I think it's something that a lot of people overlook in thinking about this, building off of what you're saying there. And based off of what I was saying toward the end of our time on the radio is, look, I view the United States as 48 continuous states, Hawaii and Alaska, and then, our territories, but as 48, 50, whatever, different countries. That's my opinion. I know that doesn't fly. Everyone thinks we're one mass blob, and everybody that lives within the borders of the United States are all the same. We hear equality thrown around. And here's what I'm getting at with this. It used to mean something to be a citizen of the state of Florida, to be a citizen of the state of Indiana, to be a citizen of the state of Oregon. And I think it still does. We just don't recognize it that way. We are different ethnically. You know, when you travel through the Midwest, you see the fingerprints of German immigrants all over the place. When you travel through Pennsylvania, you see the fingerprints of the Dutch. When you travel through Maryland, you still see the fingerprints of Catholicism and the impact that it had. Obviously, clearly, you could probably speak to this more than I can, being born and raised in San Diego, of the influence of, you know, not only just Latin American, but, you know, Native American heritage down there. There are a lot of differences in this country. And so I guess what I'm getting at with all this is the point I'm trying to make is that, you know, when you start looking at where immigrants, and this is the biggest case I can make for why states should have the right to pick and choose who they want to come in, why in the world would you want to bring in immigrants from a part of the world that run almost completely contrary to the fabric of the culture of the state in which you live in? You know, if you were to take X number of Syrian refugees and drop them into the Midwest, they're not going to have a bit of anything in common with anyone. Now, if you place them in the Northeast, in New York City, or in a more diverse population in this country, you know, maybe Chicago, okay, I'll grant that to you. But to put them in, like, I've seen stories of like immigrants that settle in Iowa, and I'm thinking, like, what are you going to have in common with anybody in Iowa? And I know the multicultural group is probably jumping out of their seat right now, ready to choke slam me through a table. But look, the fact is, we're more segregated today than we were pre-Brown versus the Board of Education in our schools and in our communities. The people have clearly spoken. We want to be around like-minded people. Even look in cities, right? You see Chinatown, Greek Town, Little Mexico, Little Italy, for a reason, right? I mean, that's natural for people that are like-minded to band together. Does that all make sense?
Yeah, we sort ourselves that way. I mean, that's not like, look, the person who wants to put very little thought into this is just going to call you a racist for saying that. But you're right. I mean, if you go into like Queens, which is probably the most diverse place on the planet, honestly. What you're going to see is you're going to see Puerto Rican neighborhoods. You're going to see Jamaican neighborhoods. You're going to see, I mean, this automatic sorting process that human beings go through is normal, you know, and you talked about Brown, which I thought was Brown versus the Board of Education. I thought was interesting. Our government has had this fixation with having a certain composition of race together. I mean, maybe they have these percentages in their mind that are optimal, and that this is the correct mix that you need to have in order to have an ideal society. And it's just, that's not the way humans interact. I mean, we wouldn't ordinarily sort ourselves that way.
No, absolutely. And I always tell the story about when I was at IUPUI doing my grad work for education. I had a professor who was of, I believe, Vietnamese descent, and she was we were talking about urban places and what, you know, these spaces mean to different people in our society. And somehow we got on the topic of talking about how there was a battle down on the south side of Indianapolis, and anyone who is listening to this that is familiar with the cultural landscape of the south side of Indianapolis, it probably looks a lot like 1950s America still. I mean, it's a pretty, you know, white bread, you know, redneck type area. And in one particular neighborhood on the south side, there was a large population of Burmese refugees that had moved into this neighborhood. And the professor is telling us that, look, you know, in Burmese culture, yards aren't a thing, right? Like the way that we think of yards as grass and everything. And of course, most neighborhoods have homeowner association policies that tell you, you know, you got to keep your yard well maintained and mowed and manicured and all this. Well, these guys came in, they ripped the grass out and they put rock gardens in. And they started planting shrubs and other little plants and things like that. Well, you can guess what happened there, right? You had this huge battle of people who were, you know, going around saying, you can't do that. That's not uniform policy with the homeowners association. You're going to be fined for that. And of course, they were seen as, you know, picking on the minority there and things of that nature. It was just a clash of cultures, right? And, you know, so whether there was a amiable solution to that, I don't know. The point to all that is that the multicultural crowd, which I believe is the one that would be yelling for just, anything goes, bring anybody in at any time. I just don't think there's enough credence given to the fact that we need to preserve the cultures that we want in our lives. And that's why we settle the way that we do.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I just want to make a quick point on when I say I'm from open borders, which I am. I'm against a welfare state. I am for open borders, and I think that if that is the case, then again, people will naturally sort themselves. Laborers in the labor market will find where their demand is needed, and they'll go there. And I think that will be better for all parties. But I also believe in the process of assimilation. I often think, like, if I was going to go to, let's just say that for whatever reason, I had to go to, Latvia or something, and I had to move there for an extended period of time, what measures would I take? Clearly, you would figure out what the customs are. You would figure out what the norms and traditions are. You would figure out what is considered polite and what is considered rude. I would absolutely learn the language. I mean, that seems to me like it would be first and foremost. I wouldn't step foot there. I mean, depending upon how quickly I had to be there, I wouldn't step foot there without learning some basic phrases in order to get along. And then you just spend time learning and appreciating and assimilating into the culture. And I will tell you this, Justin, I did this when I moved from San Diego to Crawfordsville. That's actually a fairly significant culture change. And it really is.
Yeah.
But you have to, things are different here. And, I go back now and people say, well, oh, God, you're like different change, Midwest, whatever. But that's what you do. I mean, it's appropriate.
Yeah, and I think the thing that's really, really important about that, and what I would just say to kind of conclude what my point was earlier, is every bit of this is happening naturally. You would do that because it's innate in you to do that. You wouldn't do that because some bureaucrat would be pointing a gun at your head and saying, learn the language or else.
Right.
Just like when somebody would come to this country, I wouldn't want some bureaucrat saying you need to take X number of refugees from here or else. You know what? Like you talked about Queens, if there wants to be an area where people are like, like Broad Ripple here in Indianapolis, right, would be probably like the most diverse area, or maybe like Mass Ave downtown. That's like the artsy cultural district in downtown Indianapolis. That's completely fine. I'm not against that at all. If people want to live their life that way and live with people of all different backgrounds and ethnicities and religions and cultures and all that, that's completely fine. But please do not force that upon me. Please do not look at me different if I choose not to want to live my life that way. And if somebody wants to move into society with me, like you said, I would expect it. And I'm sure, most people probably would say, if I'm going to move to this area, I want to pick up on the customs and traditions and things of that nature. Like you said, language, morals, values, everything like that. Otherwise, you'd be a fish out of water. You would be ostracized. And when that happens, I know that there are people that say, well, that's not fair. It's just the way it is. And I would think the same if I had to move somewhere as well. I would hope that the people would expect me to adapt to their standards and traditions.
It's funny, you talked about the way that people kind of sort themselves by like-mindedness, given the fact that I grew up about 20 minutes from the border and I played soccer. Who do you think most of my friends were? I mean, it's like it's one of the things that that transcends race. All my friends were Mexicans, but you didn't look at it that way. You looked at, okay, these are people who I have something in common with. And so, yeah, that sorting process doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a whole bunch of different, distinctly different looking communities. You're just going to have different value systems.
Right, absolutely. And again, I would just echo that. I think that, what we value here, and I can't look into the minds of the founders to know why they were as vague as they were. I mean, clearly there was immigration going on during the period of time that, the Constitution was written, and why they didn't explicitly say anything in regards to immigration, maybe
Well,
because
I
they.
think you hit it. It's states' rights. I think that was obvious to them.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, when they acknowledged that each of those states were essentially sovereign countries that were united in the common themes of freedom and liberty in the market and common defense, they didn't feel the need to have to say, oh, and by the way, North Carolina, you need to not only be taking in X number of Irish or, Scottish immigrants, but you also need to be taking in some French and Belgium and,
Right.
whatever immigrants. They figured that would work itself out and be left up to the states and for it to happen naturally. I think that's the thing that you'll get the best results with immigration if you just allow it to happen naturally.
And it's true. That's why you did see, I mean, you mentioned Scots. That's why you did see Scots in the Carolinas and Georgia. Look, the English thought that they were subhuman. So would you expect Scots to go and move into the Northeast? I mean, that simply wouldn't happen.
Oh, right. Yeah, absolutely. And I tell you, you want to see firsthand account of that. I know it's Hollywood, but The Gangs of New York is a fantastic movie that kind of illustrates that.
I think I've seen parts of it, but I haven't seen the whole thing. I have heard it's good though.
Yeah, it's a really good account of some of the different ethnic groups that I think it was 7 Points in New York, where there were all these different, just groups, and I think there's like clergy that are in the movie too that are trying to keep the peace between everybody, and it's just a really look at the brutal ruthlessness of turf wars and things of that nature based off of ethnicities and things of that nature, and look, obviously these many of these groups were persecuted, throughout different parts of the country and whatnot. And I'm not going to stand here and defend that, but at the same time, like you said, you're going to want to assimilate or get and band with the people that are like-minded and have commonalities with you.
I think we did a pretty good job here tonight. Anything else you
Yeah,
want
that
to
was
touch
a
on?
lot of fun. Yeah, that one was a good one. I wasn't quite sure what to think coming into this one, as far as topic and what we'd have to say, but I think that steered itself in a really good direction. I like that.
Okay, good. Unfortunately, we don't have anything to tease the audience with because we have no clue what we're going to be talking about next week. But you know what? We'll figure out something.
Yeah, we'll come up. I'm sure. I know we've got a list floating around. We'll take a look at maybe something that's either topical or something that's of interest to us that we think that would be good for the show. So.
All right. Well, let's thank everybody for listening, and we will see you next week on the other side.
Thanks for listening. And remember, you're not fully informed until you've heard the other side.